Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Ephraim Graham. Millions of Americans are digging out of a winter wonderland today. Record-breaking snow forced the governors of New York, New Jersey, and Tennessee to declare states of emergency, and the worst may not be over. The frigid temperatures are expected to stick around at least through the weekend. Blinding snow and bitter cold turn roads into sledding hills across the Northeast and Midwest.
It's terrible. I mean, it's ridiculous. I almost did a 360. I almost lost control of the vehicle.
This latest polar freeze has more than 80 million Americans buried under heavy snow. Some are seeing a few inches and others are seeing a whole lot more. More than a foot of snow fell in New Jersey, 11 inches in the middle of New York City.
A lot of people should have just stayed at home today.
Many airplanes aren't going anywhere. Wednesday began with more than 1,000 flight cancellations. And the winter blast closed schools in a long list of cities, including Boston, Philadelphia, and here in Washington, D.C., where they wasted no time getting out for a snowball fight.
School's closed. We finished all of our work. There's nothing else to do.
The snow may have stopped falling for now, but the worst isn't over. The deep freeze is expected to stick around for a few days, and that sparked a shortage of firewood in places like Maine.
I've told many customers that, sorry, no seasoned wood.
The early and harsh winter has also prompted a global propane shortage for people who use the gas to heat their homes. Suppliers in Ohio have been forced to place limits on their delivery schedule.
They said that you could only get 100 gallons at a time, and you had to drop it to at least 20% before you could order again.
And at least 22 states are dealing with liquid propane shortages right now. While the bone-chilling weather won't keep pro-life advocates from marching through Washington today, the annual March for Life takes place in the nation's capital every January 22nd. This year marks the 41st anniversary of the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision. An estimated 56 million American babies have been aborted since then. Every year, thousands gather to march against the court ruling that made abortion legal. The March for Life is known to be the largest pro-life event in the world. Meanwhile, new details are emerging about how abortion became legal in America. It turns out the Supreme Court's abortion decision in 1973 was just an accident of history. As Paul Strand reports, it came after intense behind-the-scenes lobbying by 4 liberal justices bent on sweeping away abortion restrictions.
When the Supreme Court took up Roe v. Wade, it wasn't even supposed to be about the broad question of legalizing abortion. It was supposed to be a small case about who had jurisdiction over abortion prosecutions. But lawyer Clark Forsyth at the Americans United for Life has looked into the justices' personal papers and files to discover how Roe morphed into a ruling that defied public opinion and forced legal abortion on the U.S. In his book, Abuse of Discretion, Forsyth relates how health emergencies caused 2 conservative justices to suddenly retire in 1971 and flip the court from conservative to liberal.
It empowered a 4-3 majority, 4 justices who were bent on eliminating the abortion laws to push ahead during those twin vacancies to use the cases to declare a right to abortion and eliminate the abortion laws.
Those 4, Douglas, Brennan, Marshall, and Stewart, lobbied and pressured a wobbly Justice Blackmun, the author of the Roe ruling, to join them in their cause.
And he was pushed continuously month after month, at point after point, by Justices Douglas, Brennan, Marshall, and Stewart to expand the decision, sweep away more regulations, declare a broader right to abortion, and so forth.
Forsyth says the court was swayed by the 1960s sexual revolution and the belief at the time that a population explosion was about to cause global famine.
The population crisis was a big theme of political rhetoric in the late 1960s. It influenced the justices, clearly.
Pro-lifers have fought the idea right till today that abortion is safer than childbirth, but the justices accepted that notion by faith with little proof and were swayed by it.
Abortion is safer than childbirth. There was no evidentiary record on that. There was no trial. There were no medical experts, no cross-examination.
Abortion advocates hoped at the most it could be made legal within the first 12 weeks of life, but then a Blackmun staffer pushed him to make abortion legal before a fetus's life could be viable. And then the justices arbitrarily decided that would be 28 weeks.
the pro-abortion organizations, the medical organizations, never argued for a right to viability. They were only essentially arguing for a right in the first trimester or the first 12 weeks. And so when the sweeping ruling comes out, even the most pro-abortion advocates were just astounded at the scope of their what they thought was their victory.
Forsyth's book documents how the justices then decided to tag on that any abortion would be legal if the pregnancy threatened the mother's health. But that could mean mental or emotional health, not just physical health.
That gives us abortion on demand from conception to birth, and it also ranks the U.S. as one of just 4 nations of 195 around the globe that allows abortion for any reason after fetal viability. Those 4 nations are China, North Korea, Canada, and the United States.
Forsyth believes Roe v. Wade can still be overturned because the sweeping decision so went against the will of the American public, both then and now.
It not only conflicted with public opinion in 1973, but it conflicts with public opinion today. I mean, the court's edict is abortion for any reason at any time, and today only 7 to 9% of Americans agree with that, a tiny minority of Americans.
Paul Strand, CBN News, the Supreme Court.
Former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell and his wife are fighting charges filed against them in federal court. Prosecutors allege they violated federal laws by accepting gifts and loans from Star Scientific CEO Johnny Williams. In exchange, they say Williams was given access to state officials who could help his business. McDonnell says he regrets accepting gifts from Williams, but he did nothing wrong.
I did nothing illegal for Mr. Williams in exchange for what I believe was his personal friendship and his generosity.
McDonnell says no taxpayer money was given to Star Scientific, nor did the company receive any government benefit of any kind from his administration. The former governor says he regrets his judgment, but he broke no laws. Secretary of State John Kerry is in Switzerland today, hoping to broker a deal to end the Syrian civil war. The talks are off to a less than hopeful start as neither side is giving ground. The Syrian opposition says any discussion of President Bashar Assad staying in power will end peace talks. He must be ousted. Meanwhile, the Syrian government is calling the opposition traitors and agents of Israel. The United States says the Syrian government is responsible for turning a peaceful protest movement into an international catastrophe, and President Assad cannot be part of the transitional government. Canada's Prime Minister Stephen Harper concludes a 4-day state visit to Israel today. He held a joint news conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, where they announced a strategic partnership.
Canada and Israel both want to see a Middle East that is more stable, secure, and free. But the challenges facing the region are serious indeed. And to better meet those challenges together and to cooperate in the field of international affairs as a whole, our 2 foreign ministers have just signed a memorandum of understanding formalizing the Canada-Israel strategic partnership.
I've said repeatedly I'm not here to single out Israel for criticism. We've got more than enough people standing up in the world ready to do that. You don't need me. I'm here to talk about our shared values and interests.
Harper, who is an evangelical Christian, also addressed Israel's parliament this week. He said Canada supports Israel because it's the right thing to do, a moral imperative, and of strategic importance. President Obama is being criticized for making light of terrorist threats. In a recent interview with The New Yorker, he referred to the current al-Qaeda terrorists as the JV team. He said, quote, "The analogy we use around here sometimes is if a JV team puts on Lakers uniforms, that doesn't make them Kobe Bryant." The Heritage Foundation says it's frightening and revealing the president appears to be taking the terrorist threat lightly. In an article, Heritage states, before Benghazi, they claimed al-Qaeda was defeated and on the run. 4 dead Americans later, this was proven false. Then the president said, "We cannot stay at war forever." Again, a nice sentiment, but in the real world, war doesn't end until both sides stop fighting. Islamist terrorists have plotted at least 60 attacks against the U.S. since 9/11. The United Arab Emirates has convicted 30 men of trying to set up a Muslim Brotherhood cell in their country. The men have been given up to 5 years in prison. The verdict is part of a broader crackdown on Islamist opposition groups in the Arab Gulf countries. The group of 20 Egyptians and 10 Emiratis was also accused of trying to obtain security data. The 10 locals were convicted earlier this year of trying to undermine the government. Coming up, Ukraine rocked by riots, how the church is getting involved in that fight for freedom. In the Ukraine, 3 people are dead in the most recent clashes between police and protesters. The protests turned violent after the government passed draconian laws in an attempt to end the ongoing standoff. The laws forbid putting up tents or stages in public places without a permit. They also ban the use of loudspeakers in public and impose long jail sentences for taking part in, quote, mass disorder. The U.S. has denounced the laws, calling them anti-democratic, and warned they could lead to a police state. The protests began 2 months ago when Ukraine's president signaled he wants closer ties with Russia over the European Union. Ukraine's churches are responding to the crisis. Many evangelical and Orthodox leaders have taken part in the protests while rejecting the violence. And they're trying to help the Ukrainian people reconcile the Bible's teachings to respect authority, while at the same time stand up for their God-given rights. Recently, about 150 church leaders from several denominations came together to address those questions. They issued a statement which reads, in part, "We draw the attention of the government and protesters to God's commandments, love and forgiveness, without which the demand for equity may end up with chaos and violence. We confirm the main task of the church at this time is to be salt and light to our society." Sergey Arakuba is a Ukrainian-born and president of the Chicago-based group Russian Ministries. He joins us now for more on the situation. Sergey, Russian Ministries helped organize this meeting of church leaders. What's the goal of these church leaders?
The goal of these meetings is to mobilize the evangelical church and entire Christian community in Ukraine and globally to get involved, first of all, in prayers, but also to understand the responsibility of their rights in the society. We want the evangelical church to be involved in reaching out to the community during these protests and bringing the nonviolent solution in all this controversy and the turbulence in Ukraine.
What role has the church played in these protests?
So the church is playing, of course, its significant role, and there is a controversy. There is a division within the church itself. Some people prefer to submit to the government despite of all those, they call it draconian laws that will definitely impact religious freedom. But the younger generation is taking another step forward. They say, we don't want to be isolated with the European community, with global Christian community, and we really fight for our freedom that we value so much. So that's why we want to bring this reconciliation. We want the church to bring nonviolent solution into this controversy and turbulence.
Can you talk a little bit more about how these new anti-protest laws are affecting churches?
So this new anti-protest laws, that basically done following the Russian example. So that, for example, one of those points mentions that all non-governmental organizations that receive support from abroad, they will be registered and labeled as foreign agents. So this definitely will seriously impact overall mission work in Ukraine, as it does today in Russia. And there are other laws that government wants to protect itself during these protests, but they mostly will affect church because they assemble more than 10 people together. So there will be not more than 5 cars can follow each other to certain events. Prayer groups, assembly of larger group of people, all of this may seriously impact the church in Ukraine.
Indeed, that is very clear. Give us a little bit of background on the political crisis. Why do these protesters prefer closer relations to the West and not Russia?
Why Europe over Russia? young people, they believe allying themselves with Russia, it will bring, it will take them step backward. So when more control, more dictatorship, more regulations, more oppression probably. And as we see in Russia today, issues of religious freedom, human rights are very much violated. And that's the concern of these protesters.
Indeed. How can our viewers pray for Ukraine in this hour?
I want the global Christian community to pray for Christian leaders, evangelical leaders in Ukraine, so that they will encourage their congregations, their churches, and overall will truly be the light and the salt in the midst of those controversies.
Sergey Arakuba of Russian Ministries, we applaud your efforts. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Up next, he is more cowboy than congressmen, and politicians around the country are trying to find his secret to winning elections. Find out how he wooed the voters in his district and why members of both parties are taking note. That story's next. Two Republican lawmakers announced they will run for U.S. Senate seats in the upcoming election. Oklahoma Congressman James Lankford jumps into the race to fill the seat left open by Senator Tom Coburn. And former RNC Chief Ed Gillespie formally announced his campaign for a U.S. Senate seat representing Virginia. Gillespie's candidacy has been widely expected. Lankford said his decision came after a great deal of thought and prayer, as well as discussion with his family. In California, Andy Vidak went from an obscure cherry farmer to state senator almost overnight. He was elected in a heavily Hispanic district against a Hispanic opponent, and he's a Republican. As David Brody reports, his story may carry some lessons for the National Republican Party.
It looks like a typical swearing-in ceremony.
I, Andy Vidak, do solemnly swear. Do solemnly swear.
But California State Senator Andy Vidak will tell you that the ride to get here was anything but typical.
What a long, strange trip it's been.
Vidak may look like a state senator when he takes the floor, but at heart, he's still a cherry farmer from the Central California Valley. He brings his lunch to work. He wears his cowboy hat during off hours and drives his faithful pickup truck, which has about 300,000 miles on it. Oh, and please don't call him Senator.
I'm just Andy.
Andy enjoyed life as a farmer and rancher, but as time went on, he watched environmental policies devastate California's economy. For example, farmers can only receive a small portion of water in order to protect fish.
We've got some radical environmentalism that has pushed it a little bit too far, well, actually a long way too far. And when we start putting insects and plants and animals ahead of human beings, I don't agree with those types of things.
So the question is, how did Andy Vidak do it? How did an obscure cherry farmer south of Fresno, California, end up here at the state capitol in Sacramento? He did it with the help from Hispanics in his district. But what really caught the nation's attention is that he won against an Hispanic woman in a district that's 60% Hispanic and heavily favors Democrats.
I don't see colors. I mean, it was just about going and talking about common sense, values, common sense, because there is no party lines with common sense.
Nationally, the Republican Party is still trying to gain more of the Hispanic vote. As the Latino population increases its share of the electorate, their future votes are crucial to the GOP. So what can they learn from Vidak's victory? Well, it helped that he speaks fluent Spanish, but also his working class roots, pro-family values, and community involvement really cemented the bond.
I cooked menudo for 9 hours in 98-degree heat. But I went to that not because they were Hispanic, but because there was 10,000 people there. And, we just have to go out and talk to folks. I don't ride a white horse. I'm not a silver bullet.
That underscores a larger point, authenticity. He didn't treat Hispanics as a political talking point, something that couldn't be said about his opponent. Opponent Leticia Perez received heavy criticism after attempting to attract churchgoers by using the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe in a campaign flyer. The lesson? Overtly political moves will not work with Latinos. And then there is immigration, a position where Vidak showed compassion by embracing a pathway to citizenship for illegal immigrants.
I don't believe in breaking up families. Folks have broken the law to come here, but then there's a bunch of minors that came that, they had no choice in the matter. And we have to look at that.
And so there you have it, a lesson for the GOP from Andy Vidak. Compassion, authenticity, and time spent with Hispanics, plus a pro-family message. Vidak also knows his victory included one more vital element, a faith in Jesus Christ.
I don't know how you could be a farmer and not have a lot of faith in God and know that He's in charge, and you need to work as hard as you can, and create all the opportunities you can. But at the same time, there's a higher power. Jesus Christ is my Savior, and through that, all things are possible. And here I am in Sacramento.
A simple farmer ready to do business.
I come to Sacramento armed with a smile, a handshake, and my common sense.
David Brody, CBN News in Sacramento, California.
And finally this hour, heading to the Oscars this year is the faith-based film Alone Yet Not Alone, making it one of the big surprises of this year's award season. The film has been nominated in the category of Best Original Song, beating out artists like Coldplay and Taylor Swift for the nomination.
I will not be bent in fear. He's the refuge I know is near.
The Los Angeles Times reports the song plays a crucial recurring role in the film. It's performed by Christian author and speaker Joni Eareckson Tada for the official film release. And the production team includes Emmy Award winner and previous Oscar nominee composer Bruce Broughton and Regent University alumnus Kenneth Altman as production manager. All right, praying for them to bring home that Academy Award. Well, that's going to do it now for CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. Take the time to tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you join us again right here next time. Make it a wonderful Wednesday, everybody.